For your descendants to be characters like Madara and Itachi, you have to be pretty strong, and Indra was very much that. But what if I said that Indra isn't just strong, but would completely slaughter and honestly one-shot every single Uchiha to ever live before his introduction, and I can prove it. To firstly understand the Son of God's true might, we must first open with a preface that Databook 4 words best, in that Indra is a god of war and combat, a genius who is the son of the great Hagoromo, inheriting his power from birth as the rightful heir. He possesses the strength to overcome any obstacle alone. Being this rightful heir and talent in comparison to Ashura, Indra would eventually grow to walk a path of his own, like how both Sasuke and Madara will later come to do through their natural inclinations to follow the path of Indra. And Databook 4 even plays off the idea of Madara being Indra's reincarnate through this natural power dynamic with Hashirama, stating Madara to be the genius elder brother as opposed to Hashirama, who inherited the father's will, implying another pretty subtle comparison that in power and ability, Indra was essentially born with the pinnacle level talent. As a matter of fact, Hagoromo himself actually even believes this. When talking to Naruto, we see that he states, quote, "There was a huge difference between the two. One possessed genes containing my powerful chakra, and one did not. And that most importantly, this manifested in the most extreme manner." Now, furthermore, this would basically contextualize the hermeneutics of this inheritance from birth, and would mean that when Databook 4 states on two separate occasions that Indra inherited all of Hagoromo's power, the distinction of from birth punctuates each line, which seems to immediately rule out Indra being a literal Hagoromo level threat from birth, which perhaps is true, but the power which it is talking about is not necessarily the ability to do something or act in a particular way, but is rather the raw genetics, fitting with the context of Hagoromo having two sons. For example, Indra is stated to have possessed strong ocular powers and senses from birth, but obviously he wasn't born with the Sharingan. But what he was born with was genes by which a powerful Sharingan could manifest. And Hagoromo actually confirms this in the anime, saying that he inherited his power from Kaguya, and even remarks just after that Indra, however, was different. And Indra was merely 10 years old, he was inventing jutsu that not even Hagoromo could do. And Hagoromo states that this genetically engineered talent manifested in the most extreme manner, implying that Indra isn't just a prodigy, but perhaps the greatest prodigy ever. And I'm not kidding. And to further play off the anime's interpretation, Zetsu in the aforementioned episode states that Indra has inherited Kaguya's power, which is pretty insane for obvious reason. So then, as he grows beyond his childhood, we see that Ashura, as stated in Databook 4, had no choice but to rely on both his own effort and the cooperation of others to obtain power rivaling that of his brothers, who he admired and even strove to be like, though still unfortunately recognized that he lacked natural talent, and because his own talent alone was insufficient, he formed bonds with people and ultimately reached the true essence of Ninshu, and more importantly, he attained power rivaling that of his brothers, according to Hagoromo. But how strong was Indra by this point? And well, that's actually a bit complicated, except he's probably rivaling Hagoromo, if you could believe it, as in Databook 4, in the Shinobi Facts section, it corroborates my hermeneutical analysis of genes, but also, in this file, it states he was born with talent as if he had inherited all of Hagoromo's power, and was able to accomplish everything on his own, which is expounded upon even more in Indra's file, which states that he had all of Hagoromo's power from birth and possessed the power to overcome any obstacle alone. And references like being able to do anything are usually a power-based means in, a normal power definition, and typically not, well, they could philosophically create a new way of life for shinobi, like in the case of Itachi and Nagato, where the former states that the two can accomplish anything with their two ocular abilities, which is clearly a power notion. Most characters also fully manifest a large portion of their potential in their teenage years. Take Kakashi, arguably the greatest prodigy aside from Indra, where you'll see that his latent ability was largely achieved in his Anbu counterpart, and it wasn't until later 6 Paths Amps that he was really altered. Minato, Shisui, and Itachi are also 3 good examples of people who possess or manifest their power pretty young. Not to say they couldn't have grown further, but just that more than half of their power was probably manifested by that point. And interestingly, Sasuke is arguably the best example. He had truly evolved to basically his maximum ability, having gotten Susanoo variations, peak level ninjutsu, largely hailing from his EMS, when he was 17. So logically, with Indra's talent manifesting in the most extreme manner, according to Hagoromo, who's literally talking to Sasuke, would have also probably reached a similar point where he may have been actually very close to Hagoromo. And this fits with his ability to overcome any obstacle, with the first and foremost obstacle for Indra being asked is, could he succeed Hagoromo? Regardless, Ashura finally attains power rivaling that of his possibly Hagoromo-level brother, and then is chosen by Hagoromo to be the successor. Meaning Ashura, too, is now near this Hagoromo level, if you believe that, when Hagoromo then decides that Ashura alone will be entrusted Hagoromo's raw chakra and power, which is something the old sage even comments on later, implying that Ashura wasn't getting a 6-pass amp like Naruto and Sasuke, but in fact was getting like twice the amp of Naruto and Sasuke, hence why Ashura then gets a literal pseudo 6-pass sage mode, resembling but not identical to Naruto's 6-pass sage mode avatar that he used to defeat Sasuke in the final valley. The difference particularly being in how both Indra and Ashura are proportionate to a typical perfect Susanoo size, and the avatar is still only the size of the Susanoo head, meaning it's much smaller. Ashura also resides in the avatar's belly when Naruto resides in its head, and most importantly, the reason why this isn't identical is the 4 databook lists Naruto as the only user of the jutsu. Some creators have made the argument, or at least presupposed the possibility, of this being a baby Kurama, but I don't directly subscribe to that due to not only all the aforementioned reasons, but also they don't even look that similar outside of maybe a basic animalistic head shape and perhaps the color, although we don't even really know that for sure. And the head splits off differently and has different lines, and the tail sits more as a cape, more likely resembling the, full 6-pass variation, the triple-headed one, hence to why it has that cape style and the extra arms. And I mean, Ashura has a literal necklace, so this probably just isn't Kurama, but rather a more pseudo form, at least being more closely aligned with the 6-pass variation due to its 3 heads and an extra arm. Perhaps it's the normal 6-pass Sage Mode avatar if Naruto didn't use it with KCM and that avatar, perhaps changing it from this original variation to more of a Kurama size and changing some of the features to more closely resemble Kurama, but whatever. However, and more importantly, it does still show and possess things like true seeking orbs, showing just how divine Ashura has truly become to battle Indra, who would then have his smoldering embers of anger and hatred stoked by Zetsu, who whispered to the heartbroken Indra, stoking these embers into a hellfire. And the theory I've argued for the last couple of years is that Indra's Mangekyo probably awakened here, and allowed for him to just match that monstrous Hagoromo-level Ashura, who then got all of Hagoromo's power and true seeking orbs to a 6-pass state, on top of that, with just his Susanoo and Sharingan abilities. And this would mean that Indra would obviously be then undeniably beyond this alive Hagoromo, and possibly even more, depending on how you interpret a few remarks concerning Sasuke and the reincarnation of Indra. As Databook 4 in that previous section then goes on to state that, quote, Indra and Ashura crossed blades time and time again, but the flames of their conflict could never be extinguished. Their souls continue to reincarnate over and over, with the reincarnations of each generation meeting the same fate, implying one primary idea that Indra, through some means after fighting with Ashura for his whole life, possibly alluding to some true prime, monstrously powerful older Indra, he would passively reincarnate his chakra for thousands of years, with this being something that Final Valley Sasuke believes is then possible for him to do after getting the Rinnegan and 6-pass chakra, hence to why he can now showcase some degree of alive Hagoromo's power from the point when Indra had reached this level and how they can disseminate the Biju's chakra. But what does this all mean though? Well, to be honest, it's actually just probably pretty consistent that Indra grew with time and became some high 6-pass tier combatant. And while many people will often point to Hagoromo, stating Madara is no longer Indra's reincarnate, he's obtained Ten Tails' power and is getting close to me, as a means to justify the sealing of One-Eye Jubidara for Indra, and while this outright can just be dismissed as the ghost of Indra is now haunting Sasuke, not Madara. Although, this argument regardless still presupposes a misunderstanding of how Hagoromo utilizes the word power throughout these two chapters, which I pointed out earlier, as to why this statement more contextually should mean that Madara is no longer Indra's reincarnate off the basis of having gained the genetic means closer to that of Hagoromo, having the Ten Tails, Rinnegan Chakra, and Hashirama's Chakra. And then what is Madara trying to do? He's trying to get his Rinne Sharingan and activate the Infinite Tsukiyomi. And that is why Hagoromo states he's trying to approach even Kaguya's level, despite the difference later being acknowledged as like inconceivable in a power notion. You may naturally ask, but what does the Ten Tails or anything like that have to do with Hagoromo's genetics? Well, we know that DNA and chakra are so crucial to a person that in some real sense they actually will merge throughout one's life. For example, Naruto and Kurama were together for so long that Naruto's raw DNA was passed on to his children's, with traits of Kurama in that both Boruto and Himiwari have whiskers, as Naruto so famously did. And Data Book 3, in a Q&A section, Kishimoto is questioned with Gaara keeping his sand abilities despite having lost Shikaku, to which he just states, once it's ingrained in you, you can't take anything away, not even sand. And Hagoromo was the Ten Tails Jinchuriki for so long that Ten Tails Jinchuriki 2,000 years later would have his 9 common markings and creed symbols on their back, with even Nine Tails Jinchuriki having similar though slightly different placements for these. Why? Because the Ten Tails took some of Hagoromo's DNA. But this gets even more consistent, if you could believe it, as the reason that Kinkaku and Genkaku didn't die from eating Kurama's innards, which are noted to be like a deadly poison according to Sakura, is straight up because they are more closely related to Hagoromo, and already have a very, very small amount of Nine Tails chakra within them, potentially acting as antibodies, which explains again why they didn't get poisoned and die. And so, this is why getting the Ten Tails would change the literal genetic makeup of Madara to be far more akin to Hagoromo than to Indra. And thus, that power statement isn't so much of a raw might statement and more of, again, a genetic and or chakra-based statement. Furthermore, this is why the Shikamaru novel states that, quote, Nine Tails still resided within Naruto, along with the vestiges of the other 8-tailed beast. Naruto's body was, in a manner of speaking, the Jinchuriki for the Ten Tails. In the last Great War, after becoming a Jinchuriki for the Ten Tails, Obito had gained a power rivaling that of the Sage of Six Paths, the founder of ninjutsu, and, in keeping the tailed beast within his body, Naruto also housed part of the abilities of the Sage of Six Paths. And how must we interpret this using the basic principle of charity? Well, we know that the power can't be referencing latent ability, as obviously Hagoromo is much closer to a later Jubidara, supposedly, or Final Valley Naruto and Sasuke, and so the best conclusion is again that the power usage is of a different meaning in all of these contexts, and ultimately, Indra cannot be concluded to be someone unquantifiably but necessarily below One-Eyed Jubidara. But for those who are actually curious, where do I actually think Indra probably scales? Where does a peak, later in life, prime Indra actually scale? Well, I'd probably word it something close to this. He's most certainly in a conversation of power similar to Final Valley Naruto and Sasuke. Whether you believe he is above or below is simply unknown or harder to determine. The point being in this video is that he quite literally is this Six Paths level threat. He's not just a normal Madara, EMS Madara, Hashirama, Akatsuki Slayer, Sannin Slayer, anything like that. No, he is literally a Ten Tails Jinchuriki slaying monster. So, perhaps if you want another video on Indra, or perhaps a versus battle, I can go into that even more detail, but beyond all that, hope you guys have a blessed day. Subscribe if you enjoyed or learned something new, like and hype the video so more people can see it, but more importantly, may God bless you all. Love you guys.